What if the king had simply said no? What if the word that changed everything was not a command, not a threat, not a bargain struck over wine and boar meat, but a quiet refusal delivered in the privacy of Ned Stark's solar, where the fire burned low and the wind off the moors pressed cold fingers against the shuttered windows? What if Robert Baratheon, drunk on nostalgia and something harder to name, looked at Jon Snow and saw not a bastard to be disposed of, but a blade left rusting in its scabbard? He says it almost as an afterthought. That is the cruelest part. Robert has been speaking for an hour about the South, about Cersei, about the ugliness waiting for Ned in King's Landing, and then he stops, turns, refills his cup, and says it the way a man mentions the weather. The Night's Watch, he says, is where you send men who are already finished. Jon Snow is not finished. Jon Snow has barely begun. Ned does not argue. This is the first strategic miscalculation of a chapter full of them, though it will not feel like one until much later. He knows Robert well enough to understand that the king's casual pronouncements carry the same weight as edicts hammered in gold. And so he stands very still, the way a man stands when he is deciding how much of himself to reveal, and he says nothing that matters. He agrees, because agreement is the path that asks the fewest questions. What Robert cannot know, what he will never know, is the particular geometry of dread that settles into Ned Stark's chest in that moment. Every reason Jon's future should be arranged carefully and quietly, far from the scrutiny of the capital, lives in a secret that Ned has carried for 15 years, like a stone beneath his ribs. King's Landing is the worst possible destination. King's Landing is a city built entirely from the currency of other people's secrets, and secrets there do not keep. They circulate, they mutate, they find their way to people who know what to do with them. But the king has spoken, and the king's word is the realm's word. And so Jon Snow does not take the black. He is told the following morning. Ned delivers the news himself, because some things cannot be delegated. Jon receives it the way young men receive unexpected verdicts, which is to say badly, and then quietly, and then with a stillness that is not acceptance so much as the absence of any available alternative. He had wanted the wall. He had wanted the clean simplicity of purpose it offered, the escape from the particular embarrassment of being Ned Stark's bastard in Ned Stark's castle, visible and invisible at once. That door is now closed. What opens in its place is not a door at all. It is a horse and a position and a column of riders heading south through the gray gates of Winterfell. And Jon is somewhere in the middle of it, a junior squire in the royal retinue, wearing a borrowed cloak and an expression that gives nothing away. Catelyn watches from the battlements. She says nothing, and this silence is a kind of architecture, carefully constructed, load-bearing. She had resented the boy's presence the way one resents a splinter, not for what it was, but for where it sat. And now the splinter is riding south, and the wound can finally close. She is not a cruel woman. She does not wish him harm. She simply wants her home to be only her home. And as the riders diminish into the gray morning, she allows herself something that is not quite relief, but lives very close to it. Ned watches from the yard. This is the difference between them. He cannot watch from a distance. He needs to be present for the departure the way a man needs to be present at a funeral, to bear witness, to be accountable to what is happening. He watches his nephew, the boy who carries the realm's most dangerous secret in the simple fact of his existence. ride out through the gates of Winterfell, and he does not call after him, and he does not send word ahead, and he does not do any of the 100 things a man might do if he were thinking clearly. He is not thinking clearly. He is thinking about a tower in Dorne, about a promise made to a dying woman, about the distance between what the world believes and what the world would do if it learned the truth. Jon rides at the rear of the column, behind knights who do not know his name, and ahead of supply wagons that do not care. He is watching the walls of Winterfell shrink. He is watching the moors open out on either side of the road, gray and wide and indifferent. He has never been south of Winterfell. He has never been anywhere, and now he is going somewhere he did not choose, in service to a king he barely knows, carrying nothing but his name and the specific silence that has always surrounded it. He does not know what he is. He does not know what he carries. He knows only that the wall is behind him now, and King's Landing is ahead, and somewhere in the column, several horses up, Ned Stark rides without looking back. The road narrows as it descends through the first low hills. The royal banner snaps overhead. Jon pulls his cloak tighter, and for the first time since morning, he notices that one of the king's household guards has been watching him with an expression that is not hostile exactly, but is not nothing. The road south takes weeks, and King's Landing announces itself long before it is seen. There is a smell that reaches across the miles, salt and smoke, and something organic beneath both, the accumulated breath of 500,000 lives pressed together behind a single wall. Jon has grown up with cold air and pine resin and the clean mineral scent of snow. This is something else entirely. This is what density smells like, what power smells like when it has been concentrated in one place long enough to begin to rot around its own edges. The gates of the Red Keep open, and Jon rides through them as a ghost rides through a crowd. Present, noticed, and yet somehow not quite accounted for in the official arrangement of things. He is given a room in the eastern tower, small and serviceable, with a window that looks out over a courtyard where the household knights drill each morning. The room is not an insult. It is not an honor. It is precisely nothing, which is its own kind of message. The drilling begins on the third morning, before the capital's heat has fully asserted itself over the day. Jon descends into the yard, carrying the habits of a Winterfell upbringing, a low center of gravity, an economy of movement, the northern preference for ending fights rather than performing them. The other trainees are the sons of southern lords and household retainers, boys who have been taught footwork and flourish in equal measure. They fight the way the capital does everything, with an eye on who is watching. Jon fights as though no one is watching, because he has spent his whole life learning to make himself unremarkable. Ser Barristan. Selmy watches from the arcade above the yard on the second morning. He watches the way a reader returns to a sentence that surprised him, not certain yet what made it different, but certain that something did. He does not descend. He does not speak, but he watches with the particular attention of a man who has spent 60 years learning the difference between trained skill and native understanding. He does not finish forming an opinion. He does not need to. Not yet. What happens at court 3 days later is witnessed by 30 people and discussed by 300 before nightfall. The occasion is a small audience in the throne room, a gathering of lords and household officials and their trailing satellites of wives and sons. Jon stands at the edge of it in clothes that are correct, but not quite fashionable, watching a room that moves like a single slow organism, every part of it aware of every other part. Joffrey sees him from across the marble floor, and the decision to cross it is visible in the prince's face before his feet have moved. That particular brightening of a bored and cruel intelligence that has just found its entertainment for the afternoon. He calls him the stark bastard loudly enough that heads turn. He says it again with the satisfying precision of someone who has learned that the repetition of an insult lands harder than the first delivery. He mentions Jon's mother without naming her, which is its own kind of art, a cruelty that leaves the wound without supplying the context that might allow it to be examined and dismissed. Jon does not move. This is not restraint exactly, or not only restraint. It is something more considered than that, something that Winterfell and its specific silence have been training him toward for years without his knowing. He looks at Joffrey with an expression that is courteous and absolutely empty, and he says nothing, and the nothing says everything. The lords and ladies near enough to observe the exchange shift in almost imperceptible ways. There is a woman in gray velvet who looks away from Joffrey with an expression she quickly conceals. There is an older lord near the pillar who clears his throat at the ceiling. The sympathy is real, but it is not warm. It is the sympathy of people who have been tired of something for a long time and are relieved to find the thing they're tired of made newly visible by contrast. Joffrey moves on, carrying his amusement with him. Jon remains still for a breath longer than necessary, then steps back to the edge of the room and resumes watching. He is learning the room. This is what he does now, in the absence of any other defined purpose. He learns rooms. He counts the Lannister crimson among the household guard and finds it outnumbers every other color by a calculation that does not require precision to be understood. He notices the way certain conversations stop when certain people pass through them. He notices a man in plain clothes who is never without a position of vantage, who watches the room with eyes that move the way a merchant watches a market, not out of interest, but out of the professional habit of valuation. This man's gaze passes over Jon twice in an hour, and the second time it lingers half a breath longer than the first, and that half breath costs Jon a night's sleep. If you are enjoying this Jon Snow timeline, please consider subscribing, because I upload new Westeros stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. The letters north are difficult to write because he does not yet know what he is writing about. He knows what he has seen. He does not know what it means. He tells Robb about the smell of the city, about the drilling yard, about the shapes of things he cannot yet name. He does not tell Robb about the man in plain clothes, because he does not know how to describe the specific unease of being valued by someone whose values he cannot read. He seals the letter and sets it aside and sits for a moment in the room that is neither insult nor honor, listening to the city breathe beneath his window. In the morning, when he descends again to the yard, Ser Barristan Selmy is not in the arcade. He is standing at the edge of the practice floor, and he has a training sword in his hand, and he is looking at Jon with the expression of a question that has decided it is ready to be asked. The question Ser Barristan's eyes are asking is answered before Jon reaches the center of the yard. The old knight says nothing at first. He simply raises the training sword and waits, and in that waiting is an entire curriculum. Jon takes up his own blade, and they begin, and for a time the city falls away, and there is only the back and forth of wood against wood, footwork on stone, the clean grammar of a duel between two people who have different things to learn from it. Ser Barristan does not go easy on him. That itself is a kind of respect. He presses Jon's left side, which is slightly slower, and he varies his tempo in ways that cannot be anticipated. And twice, he stops mid-sequence to correct Jon's grip, not with words, but with one precise touch of two fingers. Jon files these corrections away. He has begun filing things away. It is becoming a reflex he cannot quite account for yet. It is after the session ends, when Jon is breathing hard against the arcade wall, and Ser Barristan has gone still in the way old soldiers do, like something carved from patience, that the spider arrives. He does not appear to arrive. He is simply not there. And then he is, moving along the far edge of the yard in plain clothes as before, pausing near a pillar as if to watch the sparrows that nest in the eaves. He is always watching sparrows. He is never watching sparrows. He drifts in time toward Jon, not directly. The path is a gentle, unintentional curve that arrives at Jon's position as though by coincidence. Varys smiles when he is close enough, and the smile is the most carefully assembled thing Jon has seen in King's Landing, which is a city assembled entirely of careful things. He says that Jon handles himself well. He says it lightly, as though commenting on the weather over the harbor. Then he says that Winterfell trains its sons with a thoroughness that King's Landing rarely produces, and Jon notes the word sons and does not respond to it, and Varys notices that he does not respond to it, and his eyes shift with what might be satisfaction. He says that young men of ability sometimes find the capital uncertain, that the city has a way of making futures seem smaller than they are. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. He bows slightly, makes a remark about the sparrows that is not about sparrows, and withdraws as gradually as he came. Jon watches him go. Ser Barristan, nearby, says nothing. But Jon becomes aware, without turning to look, that the old knight has seen the entire exchange and has chosen silence as his response, and that the choice of silence is itself a form of communication between men who think carefully about what they leave unsaid. That evening, the corridor behind the Tower of the Hand delivers something Jon was not meant to receive. He is returning from the kitchens by a back passage, the kind of route a bastard squire learns instinctively in a place where the main corridors belong to people with better reasons for being seen. He hears his father's voice before he rounds the corner, and the voice is controlled in the way Ned Stark's voice only becomes when something beneath it is not controlled at all. He stops. He does not make a decision to stop. His body makes it for him. Cersei Lannister speaks then, and her voice is the inverse of his father's, smooth above the surface, with whatever controls it operating entirely out of sight. She says that certain inquiries are the business of the crown. Ned says that certain truths are the business of the realm. There is a pause between them that has the weight of something that cannot be unsaid once it begins. Cersei says, very quietly, that Lord Stark should consider what he values. Ned says, with the flatness of a man who has considered this for some time and reached a conclusion he is not pleased with, that he values what is true. Neither of them speaks for a moment after that. Then footsteps, Cersei's, precise and deliberate, retreating. Ned remains in the corridor, and Jon, pressed against the cold stone where the passage bends, understands in the way that bodies understand things before minds catch up that what he has heard is not an argument. It is a threshold. Something is crossing it. He does not sleep again that night with any depth. In the morning, he begins writing things down, not in the letters to Rob, which are for the small truths, the manageable ones. He finds a separate piece of parchment and folds it inside the cover of a book he was given in Winterfell and never read. And he writes in the small, careful hand his maester taught him the things he has observed and heard, dated and plain, without interpretation. Ser Barristan sees him doing this in a quiet corner of the yard between drills, and he crosses to him, and he looks at the page without reading it, and he says that good commanders remember everything. He says that memory is the only honest map. He says nothing else and walks away, and Jon writes the date at the top of a new entry and pauses with the quill touching the page because Ned is still in that corridor in his mind, flat-voiced and certain, and somewhere in the city, Varys is watching sparrows, and the entry does not yet know how to begin. The arrest comes at dawn, as arrests in this city always do. Dawn is the hour of cowardice, dressed as authority, and Cersei Lannister understands this the way she understands most things, not through study, but through instinct, through the animal reading of power that has sustained her through 20 years of a marriage built on nothing but mutual contempt. The City Watch, no longer Stark Gold, moves through the corridors of the Red Keep with a new certainty, and Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, Hand of the King, is taken before he can reach a door that matters. Jon hears about it the way he hears most things now. Second, third, fourth hand, each telling a little different, a little more shaped by the teller's fear. A steward who looked away, a page who saw the end of it, a groom who heard the shouting from 3 corridors distant. He assembles the picture from fragments, and the picture is not good, and he stands very still when he understands it fully, the way a man stands when he has looked down and found no ground beneath his feet and has not yet begun to fall. He is not arrested. That is the first thing to understand. Arresting him would be a declaration, a signal to the North that the Lannisters are collecting Starks the way a man collects debts, and Cersei is too precise for that kind of blunt symbolism. Instead, 2 guards appear outside his door who were not there before, and no one tells him why, and no one tells him anything at all, and the silence itself is the message. He is a piece on the board now, too significant to release, too dangerous to openly cage, so they leave him in the uncomfortable space between, where he cannot act and cannot be seen to be prevented from acting, and they wait to see what he does with it. What he does with it for 3 days is nothing. This is not passivity. This is the first real calculation of his life. Barristan Selmy comes to him on the 4th night, and he does not come through the door. He comes through the adjoining yard, moving with the particular quietness of a man who has spent decades in armor, learning how to be silent in it. And he sits beside Jon on the low bench where Jon has been watching the sky with the studied blankness of a man who is in fact watching everything else. For a long time, neither of them speaks. The old knight looks at his hands. He turns them over once and looks at the backs of them, and then folds them together and is still. He says that he stood aside. He says it the way a man confesses something that has cost him more than he expected to pay, flat and precise, without the decoration of excuse. He stood aside when they came for Ned Stark, because the order came through the right mouth in the right place, and his body obeyed before his honor could argue. He does not ask for absolution. He is not there for absolution. He looks at Jon then directly, and his eyes are the eyes of a man who has watched the shape of the world change 3 times and knows the shape of it changing again. He says that Ned Stark was the best man in that city by a distance so considerable it barely merited measuring. He says that this is precisely why he is now in a cell beneath it. Jon says nothing. He has learned in these past weeks that silence is its own kind of intelligence. Ser Barristan says that what is coming cannot be stopped. He says it without drama, the way a builder speaks of load-bearing walls, of what will and will not hold. He says that the boy who tries to be his father in this particular moment will follow his father through the same door, and that the boy who survives it and carries something north will be of more use to the people who need use of him. He does not say the word war. He does not finish the sentence about what survival requires. He does not need to. He leaves before the guard changes, and Jon sits in the yard alone with the cold and what has been handed to him, which is not comfort, which is not hope in any clean sense of the word, but which is something sharper than either. Permission, perhaps. Permission to think clearly instead of bravely. Permission to live in the mathematics of this instead of the poetry of it. The Raven goes out 3 days later. He has written it 7 times and burned 6 versions, and the final version is the shortest. And it says almost nothing in the way that only the most important letters say almost nothing. It says that Ned cannot be saved through any mechanism Jon can reach. It says that what comes next is already decided at the level where decisions are made. It says that Robb should not wait for word that it is time, because by the time that word arrives, it will be late, and in the north men move slowly in winter, and slowly is already too late. The stable hand who carries it does not know what he is carrying. He knows only that Jon paid him in something other than coin, paid him in the kind of gratitude that reads on a face and is remembered later when sides are being chosen and men are tallying what they are owed. The letter moves through the city like a slow fire. Jon returns to his room and reopens the book and finds the folded parchment and writes the date at the top, and then writes 3 words beneath it, and then stops, because in the yard below, something has changed in the pattern of the guards. Not the number of them, but the quality of their attention, the direction of it. And he folds the parchment back into the book and sits very still and listens, because whatever they are watching for, it has just arrived. The news arrives the way all truly terrible news arrives, not in a shout, not in a declaration, but in the sudden stillness of men who know something and are deciding how to carry it. Jon hears the guard speaking in the corridor. He cannot hear the words. He does not need to hear the words. He has been listening to the patterns of this keep for weeks now, the rhythms of its footsteps, the particular silences that follow particular conversations, and the silence that settles outside his door after the murmuring stops is a silence he has never heard before. It is total. It is the silence of a fact so large that the men who know it have temporarily run out of ways to be. He sits with it for a long time before anyone confirms it. He sits with the book in his lap and the folded parchment inside it, and he works through the logic of what that silence must contain, because there are only a handful of things large enough to produce it, and most of them are his father. When the door opens and the captain of his watch enters without quite meeting his eyes, Jon already knows. He has already done the work of knowing. What he has not yet done is decide what knowing will cost him, what it will require of him, what it will permanently remove from him. The softness that still existed somewhere behind the frustration, the part that had believed on some level that was not quite reasoning and not quite faith, that honor was its own protection. He does not cry. This is the thing the guards will discuss later, quietly, among themselves. That the stark bastard did not cry. That he sat very still and looked at a fixed point on the wall and was not present behind his eyes for a long period of time. And then he was present again, and what had come back was not what had gone away. What had gone away was 17. What came back had no particular age. The days that follow are cold and operational. Cersei moves pieces with her usual confidence, which is the confidence of someone who has won so many short games that she has stopped checking whether she is still playing the long one. Tyrion watches this with the expression he reserves for things that are both predictable and mildly catastrophic. He's already had the argument with her, has already laid out the arithmetic of northern rage, the impracticality of adding a bastard's imprisonment to the ledger of a lord's execution, the way that specific injustice would move through the north like a name repeated until it becomes a prayer. She has listened the way she always listens to him, which is to say, she has heard the words and identified the conclusion she intended to reach, and then arrived there by a slightly different route so that it feels like her own. Jon will be released. Jon will swear an oath. The swearing is staged in one of the smaller yards, smaller because a smaller space means fewer witnesses, and fewer witnesses means the Lannisters retain the ability to interpret what occurred. Joffrey is present because Joffrey must be seen to receive the submission, must be seen to grant the mercy, must be able to believe that this is what is happening rather than what is actually happening, which is a careful management of consequences by adults working around him. Jon stands in the yard with the light falling flat and cold across the stones and speaks the words with a voice that does not shake and eyes that do not move from the middle distance. He swears loyalty. He swears fealty. He pronounces Joffrey's name with perfect clarity. Every word is correct. Not one of them is true. Joffrey receives this with the particular pleasure of a boy who has confused compliance for defeat, which is the kind of confusion that will eventually kill him. Though, not today. Today, it simply makes him satisfied. He waves his hand in the manner he has been practicing, and Jon is dismissed from the yard, and the small ceremony concludes, and within a week, it will have been described in a letter to several northern lords as evidence of Jon Snow's loyalty to the crown. Tyrion finds him later. This is not accidental. Very little Tyrion does is accidental, which is both his greatest asset and the thing that makes people underestimate him, because they see the performance of casualness and they believe the casualness rather than the performance. He finds Jon in the corridor outside the library, and he falls into step beside him, the way small men sometimes do with tall ones, easily, without comment, as though the difference in their heights is simply geography. He does not say anything immediately. He lets the silence do some of the work. Then he says, quite simply, that oaths sworn under duress bind no honorable man. He says it the way one states a fact about weather or tides, not as comfort, not as instruction, but as information that exists independently of whether anyone chooses to use it. Jon does not respond. He walks 3 more steps before he stops, and Tyrion stops beside him, and neither of them looks at the other. "My father," Jon says, and does not finish. I know, Tyrion says. Jon nods once, a single slow motion, and tucks Tyrion's words into the same place he keeps the folded parchment. In the part of himself that is now being used exclusively for things that will matter later, in another time, in a different yard, when the accounting comes due. He continues down the corridor. Tyrion watches him go and thinks that bastards, when they finally decide something, tend to decide it completely. Somewhere to the north, Robb Stark is reading a letter. He leaves before the city wakes. That is the only way to say it plainly. He leaves, and the city does not see him go. And that invisibility is itself a kind of answer to every question anyone might have thought to ask. The gate is a servant's gate, narrow and unremarkable, the sort of passage that exists in all great houses and all great cities for the movement of things that the powerful prefer not to watch moving. A sack of grain, a body, a boy who is no longer a prisoner, and not yet anything else. Jon Snow passes through it in the gray hour before dawn, with his cloak pulled close and his eyes moving the way Ned Stark's eyes always moved in unfamiliar country, measuring, cataloging, never resting on any one thing long enough to seem like looking. Barristan Selmy is waiting at the first milepost south of the gate, with 2 horses and no explanation, which is itself a form of explanation. He is a tall man even now, even with the years settled into the lines of his face and the deliberate way he holds himself. The posture of someone who has spent decades being looked at and has decided, finally, to stop performing for the audience. He resigned his white cloak 3 days prior. The resignation was not quiet. In the Red Keep, resignations from the Kingsguard are never quiet. But Barristan Selmy's was of a particular register, calm, precise, devastating in the way that only absolute sincerity can be devastating among people who have forgotten what sincerity sounds like. He stated his reasons. He named his objections. He did not raise his voice once. He hands Jon the reins of the smaller horse without ceremony. Jon takes them the same way. They ride south first, which seems wrong but is tactically necessary. The roads north from King's Landing are being watched, have been watched, and the men doing the watching report to people who would very much prefer that neither of these particular riders reach the Northern Army. Going south to go north is the kind of logic that only makes sense on a map, and only when the map includes all the people positioned along the direct route. Barristan rides with the particular economy of motion that marks men who have spent their lives in the saddle. No wasted movement, no tension held in the wrong places. The horse and the man negotiating their relationship with decades of accumulated understanding. Jon rides well, but differently, the way a young man rides who learned from a father who learned from soldiers, functional and clean, but without the final layer of elegance that only years can deposit. They do not speak much in the early hours. There is a companionable quality to the silence between them, the silence of 2 men who have both recently made irrevocable decisions and are still engaged in the private process of understanding what those decisions mean. The Riverlands announce themselves the way disaster often does, not all at once, but in accumulation. A farm with no smoke from its chimney at an hour when there should be smoke. A field with the harvest still standing, unharvested, which means the people who should have brought it in either could not or would not or were no longer present to do so. A dog at the side of the road, unowned, moving with the particular purposefulness of an animal that has decided to manage its own situation. Jon marks each of these details the way Tyrion's words taught him to mark things, not reacting, simply recording, placing each observation in the part of himself that is being used for things that will matter later. Then the smoke, real smoke, black and thick and in the wrong direction, rising from somewhere beyond a low hill to the west. Barristan sees it at the same moment. He does not ask whether they should investigate. He does not suggest alternatives. He simply adjusts his course, and Jon adjusts his course to match, and this wordless coordination is, in its way, the first true moment of alliance between them. What they find over the hill is the tail end of a raid. Lannister riders, not many, perhaps 20, already turning to leave, their work largely accomplished. The village is a small thing, a handful of houses arranged around a well, the sort of settlement that exists because someone decided long ago that this particular patch of earth was worth the trouble of staying near. 3 of the houses are burning. The riders are moving east at a leisurely pace, taking with them grain and livestock and the particular ease of men who have been told that this is permitted, that this is, in fact, policy. Jon's horse stops. He has not asked it to stop, or rather, he has asked it without knowing he asked, some communication happening between his body and the animal that bypassed conscious instruction entirely. Barristan stops beside him. They look at the burning village and then at the retreating riders, and the geometry of the situation is plain to both of them. Pursuing the riders means combat and delay and uncertain odds. Riding on means safety and speed and the cold mathematics of the greater mission. Stopping to help means time lost, resources spent. The Northern Army arriving without them a day later than it otherwise would. Jon turns his horse toward the village. This is not a decision that takes long. Perhaps it is not a decision at all in the way that decisions are usually understood, as moments of deliberation, of weighing, of choosing between paths. It is more like a recognition. He recognizes what is required of him in this moment the way he recognizes north on a clear night, not by reasoning toward it, but by knowing where it is and moving accordingly. Barristan follows without comment. The old knight's face holds something. Not surprise, precisely, but something adjacent to it. A recalibration happening in real time. An assessment being revised upward by a single data point. The village is not entirely without defenders. It has, in fact, the thing that most villages have. People who are frightened and functional and willing to work if someone will show them the direction. Jon works. Barristan works beside him. They pull people from smoke and carry water in whatever vessels remain and establish a perimeter and make decisions rapidly in the compressed, urgent language of people who understand that speed itself is a form of kindness. When the immediate crisis has passed and the fires are reduced to sullen smoldering, there are survivors standing in the cleared space before the well, looking at these 2 men who came from nowhere and did what they did. Among the survivors are 12 men of fighting age who have, in the past hour, discovered something about themselves. That, when it is required, they are capable of more than they previously understood. They have also discovered in the same hour that they have nowhere left to be. Their grain is gone. Their animals are gone. 2 of the burning houses were their houses. The conversation that follows is brief. Jon does not make speeches. He states where he is going and what he is moving toward and what the road will require of anyone who chooses to walk it with him. He does not promise safety or comfort or outcome. He promises only direction. All 12 men come. This is not surprising when the alternatives are considered clearly. The alternatives being precisely nothing, arranged in a row, pointing at a burned field. The company of 2 becomes a company of 14, and they turn north. The neck does not welcome travelers so much as it permits them grudgingly through a landscape that seems to regard human movement as a temporary inconvenience it is prepared to outlast. The road through the marshes is narrow and certain and treacherous in the particular way of paths that know exactly where they lead and trust that visitors do not. The air thickens here, becomes something with texture, and the light bends differently through the reed-heavy horizon, and the sounds are all the wrong sounds. Too many birds, water moving beneath things that look solid. The 14 riders move through it in single file, the horses unhappy in the way of animals that have opinions about their footing and express those opinions continuously. Jon composes the raven message in his head for most of that day's riding. He has written dispatches before, brief ones, the kind a lord's bastard writes when he is trusted with minor communications. Careful, functional, stripped of excess. This message is different in kind, if not in length. It is short. It needs to be short, because short messages travel faster and misquote themselves less readily than long ones. But each word in it is load-bearing. Each word is doing structural work, and the wrong word in the wrong position could alter what Robb reads when he reads it. He sends it from a way station at the edge of the neck, a small post maintained by someone for some purpose that has become unclear over decades of marsh expansion. The raven lifts without drama and turns north, and Jon watches it go the way you watch something leave when you cannot follow it yet and can only hope that it arrives intact. The message says that he is coming. It says that he brings Sir Barristan Selmy, former Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. It does not say much else, because it does not need to. Those two facts, placed beside each other, do all the work that 1,000 words of explanation could not improve upon. Somewhere to the north, in a tent that smells of pine and cold iron, and the specific exhaustion of a young man conducting his first war, Robb Stark is about to receive a piece of information that will change every calculation on his board. The lords around him will feel it first, the shift in the room, the silence landing differently than silences usually do in command tents. And then Robb will read it a second time, slowly, and look up, and the expression on his face will be something that the lords present will remember for the rest of their lives, however long or short those lives turn out to be. The message, traveling north, has not yet arrived. The riders traveling north have not yet crossed out of the neck. Jon Snow does not know precisely what he is riding toward. He knows the direction. He knows the name on the other end of the road. He knows that in the part of himself reserved for things that will matter later, the accounting is growing larger by the hour, and the time for its settlement is drawing close. He adjusts his cloak against the marsh wind and rides on, and beside him, Barristan Selmy rides with the bearing of a man who has remembered after a long forgetting what it feels like to be going in the right direction. River Run rises from the confluence of two rivers like a thought that refuses to be swept away. Stone and timber and banners, the tully fish leaping red against blue in the morning wind, the outer walls damp with mist that has not yet decided whether to burn off or settle in for the day. Jon rides through the gates beside Barristan Selmy and feels the weight of eyes on him from every parapet every courtyard corner, every cluster of men who pause their work to measure what kind of thing has arrived. He is not a lord. He carries no banner of his own. He is a bastard, and in this world that word has weight, and the weight falls on him the moment the gates close behind him, and there is nowhere left to ride toward except the thing itself. Robb is waiting in the outer yard. He has not been able to make himself wait inside. The reunion is not tidy. It is not the kind of thing that arranges itself into careful dignity. Robb crosses the yard at something between a walk and something faster, and Jon dismounts before the horse has fully stopped. And for a moment, River Run is simply two brothers who have not seen each other in long enough that the seeing of each other is almost a kind of disorientation, a recognition so complete it overwhelms the architecture around it. They grip each other by the arm and then the shoulder, and then they are simply standing with their foreheads nearly touching, saying nothing, because nothing is the correct thing to say first when everything has changed. It does not last long. It cannot last long. Robb is a king now, or near enough that the difference is administrative, and the lords who watch from the edges of the yard are already making their calculations, already measuring the reunion against their own interests, already sorting through what this arrival means for the shape of the war. The solar at River Run has a particular quality of light in the late morning, amber and still, the kind of light that makes every face look slightly older than it is, slightly more weathered, slightly more like something that has already been decided. The bannermen arrange themselves as bannermen do, by instinct and rank, and the ancient social mathematics of men who have spent their lives in rooms like this one. And the debate begins before Jon has fully settled. Roose Bolton speaks first, because Roose Bolton almost always speaks first when something uncomfortable needs saying, and he says it in the way he says everything, quietly, without visible feeling, as if he is simply notating a fact that everyone else has been too tender to write down. A bastard, he observes, carries no legal standing in any council of lords. A bastard's council carries no weight that cannot be dismissed. A bastard's presence, however welcome in a personal sense, introduces a complication that a king cannot afford when his legitimacy is itself the subject of active contest. Jon listens to this without expression. He has had longer to prepare for it than the room knows. When Roose finishes, Jon speaks, and he speaks carefully. And what he says is this: that he is here to serve his brother, not to advise him, not to counsel him, not to hold any position or claim any standing or require any acknowledgement beyond what a brother offers a brother in a time of war. He defers entirely and publicly to Robb's authority. He makes it clean. He makes it unambiguous. He removes the complication before it can calcify into a grievance. And in doing so, he gives Robb the thing Robb needs most in that moment, which is a problem that dissolves on its own and leaves the room feeling, however briefly, that things are manageable. Robb watches him do this and understands something about his brother that he did not know before, or perhaps knew, but could not have named. Jon has learned something in King's Landing, not just information, something harder to acquire than information. The question of Barristan Selmy takes longer to settle, but only because it is more pleasurable for the lords to discuss. There is no grievance in it, only the uncomplicated satisfaction of a man's reputation arriving in a room and doing exactly what a reputation is supposed to do. Barristan has said almost nothing since riding through the gates. He has not needed to. His presence speaks in a register that cuts through the noise of argument and landed interest and the territorial pride of men who have spent months convincing themselves that Robb Stark's cause is the right one, and who now have, in the person of Barristan Selmy, the finest confirmation available in the Seven Kingdoms that their judgment was correct. By the second morning, Barristan is in the training yard before anyone else. The cavalry he works with are good. Northern men, hard-ridden, disciplined in the way that cold winters discipline men, which is to say at the level of the body rather than the mind. Barristan teaches them something else. He teaches them the mind of it. He teaches them the Kingsguard formations, the disciplined angles of approach, the way a horse and rider become a single argument when they are trained to think together. The lords who watch from the gallery above the yard do not speak to each other. They simply watch. And by midday, the story is circulating through River Run in the way that useful stories circulate, not as gossip, but as fact. That night, Robb and Jon sit together in the room Robb has been given, a smaller room off the main solar, with a fire that is slightly too large for the space, and a table between them that neither of them is using for its intended purpose. Robb has a cup he is not drunk from. Jon has been watching the fire. Jon tells him. He tells him plainly, without ceremony, because there is no version of this that benefits from ceremony. He tells him what he saw, what was said to him, what the evidence amounts to when you arrange it without sentiment. He tells Robb that Joffrey is not Robert's son. He tells him what Joffrey is instead. Robb does not speak for a long time after this. The fire moves. Outside, the rivers run in the dark, carrying whatever the dark carries. Cold water, old mud, the particular silence of things that have been moving so long, they no longer need to make noise about it. When Robb finally speaks, it is not to question the truth of it. He knows Jon. He knows what Jon would and would not say out loud. What he says is quieter than that and more precise, which is that this is not simply a piece of information. This is a door, and doors of this kind cannot be opened until the person holding the key has chosen exactly the right room to open them into. He looks at Jon across the table, and his face holds something that is not quite relief and not quite dread, and is perhaps the feeling of a man who has just understood that the war he thought he was fighting is, in fact, a different war entirely. Fought on terrain he is only beginning to map. The question is not whether to use it. The question is when and how and before whose ears the thing is said first. Because once it is said, it can or not be unsaid, and there are people in this war who would use that knowledge for purposes that neither Jon nor Robb would sanction, who would reach for it like a weapon before it has been properly forged, and shatter it, and shatter themselves, and perhaps shatter everything else along with it. Robb sets down the cup he has not drunk from, and says they will need Catelyn. Jon nods. He has been thinking the same thing for days. What he has not said yet. What he is still deciding whether to say tonight or wait until morning, when the decision will feel less like desperation and more like strategy, is the name of the person who told him. The person whose position at court makes the information both more credible and more dangerous. The person who is still in King's Landing, and who has not yet gotten out, and who, by the time the next raven arrives from the south, may have run out of room to maneuver. He opens his mouth. He closes it. The fire speaks instead, briefly, as fires do. A shift of wood, a small collapse, a recalibration of light across the room. Robb watches him and waits, because Robb has learned in these months of being a king when to press and when to let the silence do the work. And the silence is working. Jon's hands rest flat on the table, still, and the name is right there, right at the edge of the moment, and Robb leans forward slightly, not in impatience, but in the way of a man who can feel the weight of what is about to be placed in front of him, and who is making room for it. The name, when it comes, is spoken quietly, not whispered. Jon does not whisper, has never learned that particular form of caution, but quietly, in the way of a man who understands that some words change the shape of a room simply by existing in it. Robb receives it without expression, which is itself a form of expression. He sits back. He looks at the fire. He turns the name over in his mind the way a man turns a stone to check what lies beneath it. And what he finds there is not surprise, but confirmation, which is in some ways heavier than surprise. Confirmation means the thing was always true. It means the danger was always present. It means the question now is not whether to believe it, but what, knowing it, to do. The letter takes 3 nights, not because the words are difficult to find. Robb has advisors enough for words, but because the words must be exact, and exactness at this distance, aimed at this particular man, is its own kind of warfare. Stannis Baratheon is not a man who responds to flattery. He is not a man who can be warmed by appeals to shared grief or common enemy. He is a man who responds to one thing only, which is the truth delivered without decoration. And so the letter is stripped of everything that might seem like strategy and allowed to stand as pure statement of fact. There are witnesses. There are names. There are things seen and heard within the walls of the Red Keep that can be attested to by people who were present, who survived, and who will speak. Joffrey is not Robert's son. The throne belongs to no one currently seated upon it. These are not northern claims. These are simply what is true. The raven flies south. And then, after a silence that stretches across more days than it should, a ship is made available at White Harbor, and Jon sails. Dragonstone receives him on a gray morning when the sea is the color of old iron, and the fortress above the harbor looks less like a castle than like something the island grew on its own, volcanic and permanent, and indifferent to human arrival. Jon stands at the prow and looks up at it, and does not find it intimidating, which surprises him slightly, and then does not surprise him at all. He has spent years on the edge of the world, in a castle made of ice, in the company of men who chose difficulty over comfort, because difficulty was honest. Dragonstone is simply another version of that, cold, purposeful, unadorned. Stannis meets him at the harbor, which is itself a message. Not in the great hall, not at the high table with the full ceremony of reception. At the harbor, in the wind, with the smell of salt and the sound of water against stone. 2 men standing at the edge of the sea, which belongs to no one, which keeps no loyalties. Stannis studies Jon with the particular quality of attention that belongs to men who have spent their lives being underestimated, looking not for what is presented, but for what is concealed, not for the offer on the surface, but for the cost buried underneath it. What Jon offers is simple. What Jon offers is almost insultingly simple, which is exactly why it works. He does not come with maps or proposals or frameworks of alliance. He comes with the names of witnesses. He speaks them aloud one by one in the salt wind. watching Stannis's face, and Stannis's face does almost nothing, which is how Jon knows he is listening to something that matters. The names are credible. The names are specific. The names are the kind of names that could only come from someone who was there, who was trusted, who was close enough to the truth to be burned by it. Stannis asks one question, just one. He asks it in the tone of a man who has been sitting with the question for a long time and is finally allowing himself to say it out loud. He asks whether the information can be proved in a way that cannot be dismissed. Jon meets his eyes. He says that it can. He does not elaborate. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Stannis, who has spent his entire life watching men dress up half-truths in the clothing of certainty, recognizes certainty when it stands in front of him without clothing at all. The agreement that forms between them is not warm. Warmth is not the currency either man trades in. It is precise. It is bounded. It is the kind of understanding that two people reach when they are both too honest to pretend the arrangement is anything other than what it is. Two powers with aligned interests and a shared enemy and a truth between them that is larger than either of them separately. Robb's armies hold the north and the riverlands. Stannis holds the sea. The Lannisters, who have spent this war believing the worst outcome was a long siege, are about to discover what it means to fight a war on two fronts, with the water cut off and the truth running loose in the world. In King's Landing, a letter arrives in the small council chamber that Tywin Lannister reads without expression, and then reads again, more slowly. He sets it down on the table. He does not speak immediately. The other men at the table watch him and understand from the quality of his stillness that something has changed. He looks up eventually, and what he says is characteristically brief, characteristically precise, and entirely without the confidence that has underwritten every decision he has made since the war began. He says they need to know where Stannis's fleet is. He says they need to know today. The road east of Casterly Rock does not look like a place where empires turn. It is a narrow thing threading between limestone hills, worn smooth by generations of merchant carts, carrying Lannister gold toward the broader world. And it smells of dust and horse and the particular dry heat that settles over the Westerlands in the late season like a held breath. The hills rise on either side without drama, without the theatrical grandeur of the Eyrie or the bleak sweep of the northern moors. They are simply hills, useful hills. And Jon Snow, who has spent 2 months studying every survey and traveler's account that Barristan could source or recall from memory, knows exactly what they are useful for. He gives the signal before dawn. That matters. The timing matters more than anything else in the plan because Tywin's eastern column will begin moving at first light the way it always does, methodical, disciplined, every man in his place. And the window between the column's movement and its ability to reform is precisely the interval Jon has been measuring against in his mind for weeks. Barristan understood it immediately when Jon laid the scheme before him. He had looked at the map for a long moment and then looked at Jon and said that most commanders of his experience would have placed the flanking force differently, further south, which would have been safer and accomplished almost nothing. Jon had said he knew. Barristan had said nothing further. The silence was its own form of approval, earned rather than given. The cavalry comes around the northern rise in 2 bodies, and the timing holds. It holds because Jon has drilled the riders until the movement is less a maneuver and more a reflex. The horses know the signal, the riders know the horses. And when the eastern flank of Tywin's column sees the banners cresting the hill, it is already too late to matter. What Jon has cut is not the vanguard. What Jon has cut are the supply wagons, the food, the arrow reserves, the mechanisms by which an army of that size remains an army, rather than a very large and very hungry gathering of armed men a long way from home. Tywin does not lose soldiers in the first hour. He loses the capacity to continue. The main host engages from the west, where Robb has held his position through a discipline that mirrors Jon's own, waiting for the signal that the flanking move has succeeded before committing fully. There are lords in that host who whispered before the battle that the plan was too complicated, too reliant on coordination, too much a product of a young man's confidence mistaken for strategy. Robb had listened to them with the patience of someone who has already made his decision and understands that the function of objections at this point is simply to be survived rather than answered. He sends the signal. The western assault begins. What follows is not rout, not immediately. Tywin does not rout. His officers do not rout. They reform under pressure with the grim efficiency of men who have trained for exactly this kind of reversal, which suggests that Tywin has, at some level, anticipated that the war might eventually find him on the wrong side of a tactical situation. The Lannister infantry holds its shape. The cavalry on his eastern flank responds with speed and competence. None of it is enough, because the mathematics have changed, and Tywin Lannister has built his entire reputation on understanding mathematics. He retreats before the collapse becomes annihilation. That too is calculated. That too is characteristic. He retreats toward Casterly Rock with enough of his force intact to make a siege ruinous for whoever attempts it. And in doing so, he preserves both his army and his negotiating position, which may have been the secondary aim of the entire eastern deployment from the beginning. He is not a man who fights battles he cannot win. He is a man who ensures he is still present for whatever comes after. The envoy reaches Jon before he reaches Robb's camp. That is the first thing worth noting, that Tywin sends to Jon first, or rather sends to Robb's camp in a manner that assumes Jon will receive the message in transit, which implies a level of intelligence about Jon's position and movements that itself carries information. The envoy is a small man with careful eyes and a letter sealed with the Lannister lion, and he presents it with the practiced neutrality of someone who delivers messages from powerful men and has learned that survival requires performing indifference to their contents. Jon reads it once. He reads it again more slowly, the way Tywin had read Stannis' letter in the council chamber, though Jon does not know that yet. The offer is structured around a cessation of hostilities and a negotiated settlement of the Lannister position in the aftermath of the war. The terms are specific in some places and artfully vague in others, and what they are most specific about. Buried in the third clause, written in the careful language of administrative arrangement, is that no military position above the rank of subordinate commander shall be held by any individual lacking legitimate noble standing in the eyes of established law. It does not say Jon's name. It does not need to. Jon folds the letter. He looks at the envoy with an expression that the envoy will later describe to the man who debriefs him as being entirely without anger, which is the part that had frightened him most. Jon says that Tywin's terms have been received. He says they will be considered. he does not say by whom. He rides back to Robb's camp with the letter in his cloak, and two realizations sharpening against each other in the quiet behind his eyes. The first is that Tywin Lannister specifically fears him, by name and by capability, enough to have made his removal a condition of peace. The second is that Robb is about to stand before the assembled lords of the North and the Riverlands and do something that no document or sealed letter could accomplish. Speak Jon's name in the register of command, in the language of generals, before witnesses who cannot pretend afterward that they did not hear it. Robb stands before them as the sun begins to angle toward late afternoon, the light falling gold and flat across the field where the battle was decided, and the lords arrange themselves with the particular careful attention of men who understand they are witnessing something that will need to be remembered accurately. He speaks without excess. He names the flanking strategy. He names its architect. He says that the victory east of Casterly Rock belongs first to Jon Snow, and his voice carries the careful steadiness of a man who chose these exact words in this exact order for reasons that extend beyond simple gratitude. There is a silence in which the Northern Lords process what accommodation looks like when it is not requested but declared. Lord Karstark's jaw tightens. Lord Glover looks at the middle distance with an expression of thoughtful revision. These are not conversions. These are calculations, quiet and private, made by men who understand that the field beneath their feet was held by someone they had spent a year finding reasons to diminish, and the field's answer had been to disagree. Jon stands at Robb's right hand and looks at none of them. He is thinking about the letter. He is thinking about the third clause and the artful vagueness of its language and what it means that Tywin Lannister sat somewhere behind the walls of Casterly Rock and wrote a condition of peace that centered on erasing him specifically. It means something. He has not yet decided what to do with it, only that he will not decide quickly, and that Robb needs to read it before any response is sent, and that the envoy is still in camp under what passes for civil custody, which means the window is open, but not indefinitely. Above the field, above the limestone hills, the sky has gone the deep amber of late light, and somewhere behind the horizon of those hills, Tywin Lannister is counting his remaining soldiers and the distance between him and his walls, and waiting for an answer that has not yet been decided. The flag comes in the morning, just past the first hour of gray light, when the camp is not yet awake, but not yet sleeping either, caught in that thin membrane between the two. It is a white cloth tied to a plain staff, carried by a rider of no particular distinction, and the message it bears is verbal only. No letter, no seal, nothing that could be intercepted and read by the wrong hands. The rider asks for Jon Snow by name, not the Lord of Winterfell, not the commander who held the neck. Jon Snow specifically, and that specificity is its own message, carrying its own weight, arriving at precisely the moment when a man named Tywin Lannister is still waiting for a response to his own offer, and the camp's attention is directed south and west. Someone has chosen this moment carefully. Someone always does. Varys is small in person. Men who encounter him for the first time often remark on it afterward. The way his presence in a room suggests more physical substance than his body actually occupies, so that seeing him in the open air, without walls to compress against, makes him look almost slight. He comes without escort. He comes without ceremony. He stands at the edge of the camp's outer perimeter in plain traveling robes and waits with the patience of a man who has spent his entire life waiting for the right moment. And he watches Jon Snow walk toward him across the damp grass with an expression that could be described as relief. Though on Varys, that word requires careful handling. He asks for privacy. Jon gives him the riverbank, 50 yards from the nearest sentry, the water running brown and cold between its stones, and the two of them stand there while Varys speaks without preamble and without the usual curtain of indirection that has been his instrument for 30 years. He speaks plainly. He has decided, apparently, that plainness is what the moment requires, and Varys does not make that decision lightly or often. The words themselves take very little time. That is the strange thing about enormous truths. They do not require much language. Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. A secret marriage conducted in Dorne, witnessed by men now dead, recorded in documents now hidden. A child born in a tower during a siege, handed to a grieving lord who carried the weight of it home and never set it down. The child's name, his real name, the one he has never been called, spoken once, quietly, above the sound of moving water. Jon listens without moving. When Varys finishes, Jon stands still for what becomes a very long silence. He does not collapse. He does not weep. He does not reach for disbelief the way a man might reach for a shield, holding it between himself and something too large to face directly. He simply stands there, and the stillness in him is not the stillness of shock, but of something older. A man receiving a truth he has been orbiting for a long time without knowing it, feeling it settle into place the way a key settles into a lock it was made for. He asks only one question: whether Ned Stark knew. Varys confirms it. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. Jon nods once, very slowly. Then he walks to the river's edge and stands there with his back to Varys, looking north, where the sky is still dark and the stars are still visible, cold and fixed and indifferent to the things that happen beneath them. He stands there for a long time. Varys waits, because waiting is something he understands, and after several minutes, he withdraws quietly, leaving Jon alone with whatever a man carries when he discovers that the name he was given and the wound that came with it were both chosen for him by a father who loved him and could not say so. The tent is warm when Jon enters it, and Robb is already awake, already reading dispatches, already doing the work of holding a war together with the particular stubborn competence that has made men follow him across rivers and into positions they thought were impossible. He looks up when Jon enters and reads something in his face that makes him set down the parchment. He does not speak. He waits. Jon sits. He tells it the way Varys told it, without ceremony, without softening, laying the facts out plainly in the order they occurred: the marriage, the birth, the secret, and the man who carried it. Robb listens the way he listens to everything important, with complete attention, his hands still on the table, his face doing the work of absorbing something that rearranges the architecture of everything he thought he understood. When Jon finishes, Robb is quiet for a long time. The candle between them burns. Outside the tent, the camp begins its morning sounds, the ordinary world continuing without any knowledge of what is happening in this small warm space. He tells Jon that it changes nothing between them. He says it without hesitation and without qualification, because Robb Stark is many things, but he is not a man who speaks his heart uncertainly. Then he says that it changes everything about what must happen next, politically, strategically, in terms of every alliance and every claim and every piece currently positioned on the board. He looks at Jon across the candle flame. He asks him what he wants, not what duty requires, not what the blood says, what he himself wants. Jon Snow, or whatever name sits beneath that one, sitting in a tent at the edge of a war that has just become significantly more complicated. It is, Jon realizes, the first time anyone has ever asked him that. It is the first time anyone has ever asked him that, and he does not answer immediately. He sits with the question the way a man sits with something fragile, carefully, aware that pressure applied in the wrong place will break it. What he wants. The candle burns between them. Robb waits with the patience of someone who has learned that patience is itself a kind of power, and the morning sounds of the camp continue their indifferent procession outside the tent walls, and Jon Snow, or whatever name sits beneath that one, lets the question move through him like water finding its level. What follows next does not happen quickly. That is the first thing to understand. History has a tendency to compress its most consequential moments into clean lines, decisive hours, the appearance of swift resolution. But the council at Harrenhal takes 3 days, and 3 days is a long time when the air inside a great ruined hall smells of old ash and older ambition, and the lords of half the kingdoms are seated at tables arranged in a shape that makes every man equal, and therefore makes no man satisfied. Stannis Baratheon arrives at Harrenhal already knowing the mathematics of the room. He is a man who has always understood numbers more naturally than he understands people, and the numbers here are not in his favor. He counts the banners, he calculates the loyalties, he identifies the soft alliances and the brittle ones. He says nothing for the first half day, only watches, which is a form of speaking for a man like Stannis, because silence from him carries a specific gravity that other men's speeches do not. It is Barristan Selmy who changes the character of the room. He is old, and his voice carries the quiet authority of someone who has lived long enough to have earned the right to end arguments rather than begin them. He stands when the second morning of debate has already exhausted the assembled lords into something close to anger, and he speaks the name Rhaegar Targaryen into the ruined hall without flinching, without apology, and the name lands in the room the way a stone lands in still water, sending disturbance in every direction. He does not argue. He states. He recounts what he witnessed, what he knew, what the annulment and the wedding at the Tower of Joy produced. He uses the word trueborn. He uses it once. He does not need to use it again. The eruption that follows is the sound of a political world reorganizing itself under pressure. Lords who had arrived at Harrenhal with settled certainties find those certainties suddenly renegotiable. Some shout, some go very still in the way that men go still when they are calculating rapidly and do not want anyone to see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Stannis does not shout. Stannis tightens his jaw in the particular way that those who know him recognize as the outer expression of an internal event of significant magnitude. Jon addresses the council on the afternoon of the second day. He stands in the center of the hall, in the sightline of every man present, and he speaks without notes and without the practiced cadence of someone who has rehearsed a performance. He says that he never wanted a crown. He says it plainly, the way Ned Stark taught him to say true things, directly, without ornament, trusting the truth to carry its own weight. He says that a decision made by Robert Baratheon years ago, a decision to keep him from the wall, placed him on a road that led to this hall, and that a man cannot pretend a road was never walked simply because he did not choose to walk it. He says that Ned Stark taught him what duty means, and that it means accepting the weight of what is real over the comfort of what is preferred. He says he will rule, if they will have him, the way his father, and here he pauses, and the pause is understood to contain multitudes, the way the man who raised him taught him to lead, with honesty, with justice, with the understanding that power is a burden before it is a privilege. The silence that follows is different from the silences that came before. It is the silence of men making decisions. The private conversation between Jon and Stannis happens on the evening of the second day in a small chamber off the eastern corridor of Harrenhal, a room with a single window that looks out over the black water of the God's Eye. Neither man ever recounts what was said there. The lords of the assembled council will speculate about it for years, constructing theories from the few observable facts available to them. That Jon entered the room first, that Stannis entered second, that no servants were present, and that when they emerged after something less than an hour, Stannis' jaw was unclenched for the first time in living memory. What is known is what Stannis announces on the morning of the third day. He withdraws his claim, the Stormlands confirmed as his domain in perpetuity, a permanent seat at the small council, a role that is real rather than ceremonial. He states these terms without softness, and Jon accepts them without theater, and the political deadlock that has held the war in suspension for months ends in a single afternoon with a handshake between two men who will never be friends and will always, in some complicated way, respect each other. The lords begin affixing their seals to the document before the light fails. Robb Stark signs first. Outside, a raven is prepared, and the maester who carries it to the window understands without being told that what he holds will change the shape of the world. He releases the bird into the cooling air. It rises, it turns south, and in the hall behind him, someone calls for wine, and someone else begins to laugh, and the sound of it fills Harrenhal for the first time in an age with something that is not grief. The coronation does not happen in King's Landing. That is the first sign that something has genuinely shifted, that the old machinery of power is being asked to run on different fuel. The Red Keep still stands. Its towers still catch the morning light over Blackwater Bay. But Jon refuses it as the site of his crowning with a quietness that makes the refusal harder to argue with than any shouted objection. He says only that the war began in the north and was ended in the north, and that the north deserves to see it finished. The lords, most of them, understand. The ones who do not understand comply anyway, because the moment for objection has passed, and everyone in that hall at Harrenhal feels it passing. Winterfell is chosen. Of course it is Winterfell. The great houses come, and coming is itself a language. Robb Stark rides at Jon's right hand as they enter through the gates, and the sight of it, two brothers where once there was a story of separation and divergence, makes something ease in the hearts of the men who remember what the realm looked like when it was tearing itself to pieces. The Tyrells send riders and wine and a delegation led by someone who smiles too carefully and means every word of it. Stannis does not come, which surprises no one, but his representatives arrive precisely on time, which surprises everyone in exactly the right way. Even the Iron Islands send a man, a single man, standing in the back of the hall with the particular stillness of someone who has been told to observe and report back without incident. The realm takes attendance of itself and finds cautiously that it is mostly present. Jon is crowned at dawn because he asks for it at dawn, and no one who knows him finds this strange. The crown is not Aegon's crown, not the elaborate artifice of dynasty and conquest. It is iron and dark and plain in the way that honest things are plain. And when it is placed on his head, he does not smile, and he does not weep, and he stands very still in the gray northern light with his eyes open, looking at nothing and everything at once, as though the weight of it is something he has been measuring for a long time and is only now discovering that his calculation was correct. He keeps his name. This is the thing that the histories will note first, before the wars and the treaties and the long rebuilding of the riverlands, before the Night's Watch budgets and the border fortifications and the decade of careful, unglamorous governance that follows. He is offered names from the Targaryen lineage, offered the symbolism of reclamation, and he declines with the same quietness with which he declined the Red Keep. Jon. He remains Jon. The realm learns to hold both truths at once, the blood that made him and the name that shaped him, and finds that they are not contradictions, but simply the full shape of a man. The perfect kingdom does not follow. It would be a false comfort to suggest otherwise. Old wounds between houses take years to soften, and some of them calcify into grudges that outlast the men who first sustain them, passing down through generations like heirlooms no one quite wants, but no one knows how to discard. The whispers about Jon's parentage never fully cease. There are always rooms where someone lowers their voice and says the word bastard with a precision that is meant to cut, and the word finds its mark sometimes, because even kings are not immune to the places where their armor is thin. The riverlands begin to breathe again, but slowly, the way a man breathes after a blow to the chest, with effort and caution, and a long memory of what pain feels like. There are bad harvests and border disputes, and a small war in the east that is managed rather than won. The small council argues. The lords petition and complain, and occasionally conspire in the low-grade way that lords have always conspired, because power is a language they cannot stop speaking even when they have everything they need. But the great wars end. This is not nothing. This is, in fact, the whole of the thing, the axis on which the alternate world turns. The great wars end and do not begin again, and the men who might have died in them live instead and plant fields and have children and grow old in the ordinary way of people who have been given back their futures. And the Night's Watch, for the first time in living memory, receives everything it has been begging for. Men, funding, attention from a crown that does not treat the wall as an afterthought or a place to send problems. Jon never forgot what he almost became. He never forgot the cold, the silence, the particular darkness that lives beyond the ice, and does not negotiate, and does not tire, and does not care about the succession of kingdoms. He makes it the first military priority of his reign, and holds it there with a stubbornness that his small council learns not to argue with directly, because it is the one subject on which he speaks without calculation or diplomacy or the careful weighing of political consequence. He speaks about it the way a man speaks about something he has seen and cannot unsee. He rides north himself in the third year of his rule, not in state. not with the full ceremony of a king making a formal visit, but quietly with a small escort, arriving at Castle Black in the early dark of a winter evening when the torches have just been lit along the top of the wall. Ghost runs ahead of him on the ice, a white shape moving through blue shadow, and the brothers of the Watch, who see him come through the gate, stand straighter without being told to. He climbs the wall alone. This is his choice, and no one stops him, because there are moments when even kings are permitted their solitude, and the men who serve him well enough have learned to recognize which moments those are. He stands at the top in the wind with the kingdom spread out somewhere behind him, and the dark spread out before him. And he puts his hand in his pocket and feels the letter there, the one Rob wrote him in the early days of the war, when everything was uncertain and the future could have gone in any direction. A letter that says things brothers say to each other when they are afraid. They may not have the chance to say them again. He does not take it out. He does not need to read it. He has memorized every word of it in the way you memorize the things that kept you whole when everything else was breaking. Ghost stands beside him, and the wind moves between them, and Jon looks out into the dark beyond the ice, and for the first time in his life, he is entirely certain of who he is and where he belongs. That is the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this alternate history, please consider subscribing, because there is a new Westeros story waiting for you every day. Thank you for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.